I didn't respond right away. I wanted to believe it. But years of cold dismissals don't melt in one lunch reservation. What changed? I finally asked. Her eyes met mine, unblinking. I saw you on television, she said, and I realized the world already knows who you are, but I don't. That one sentence cracked something inside me. Not out of pain, but because it was true. She leaned in. I'm not asking for shares in your company or for PR favors. I'm just asking to try again. Not as a strategist or investor. Just as your mother. The sincerity in her voice startled me. I had braced for manipulation, for elegant excuses, for veiled judgment. But what I saw in her wasn't control. It was fear. Fear that she had missed her moment. That I had moved on. That was too late. Trying again doesn't mean pretending the past didn't happen, I said quietly. I know, she replied. I want to understand now. Not the valuation. Not the headlines. You. I looked at the woman across the table. The one who used to critique my posture, my haircut, my career, my everything. And for the first time, I saw not the gatekeeper of approval, but a parent realizing they'd been blind. I'm open to that, I said at last. But it'll take time. She reached for her water glass, nodding slowly. That's more than I deserve. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We didn't suddenly become best friends. But we shared a meal. And for once, we talked like two people who wanted to understand each other. Not impress, not control, not correct. Just understand. When we left the restaurant, she didn't ask for a photo. She didn't invite me to a gala. She didn't mention Grant or Brooke once. Instead, she said something I'll never forget. Your success, it's not what I would have imagined for a Carter. But I'm starting to think that might be a good thing. Then she kissed my cheek and disappeared into a waiting Blacktown car. And I stood there, watching it pull away, not as the invisible sun, but as the man I had always been becoming. A week after lunch with my mother, I stood on a small wooden stage at East Bronx High School, staring out at a sea of eager, skeptical, tired, and curious faces. Teenagers, most of them from working-class families. Kids with dreams bigger than their zip codes. Kids who reminded me of me, except I had grown up with too much structure, and they had far too little. The principal had invited me after reading a news article about PulseLink's IPO. She said the students needed to see what was possible beyond basketball scholarships and the Navy. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't a motivational speaker. I didn't have some smooth, polished story about rising from poverty or surviving the streets. But Jasmine reminded me that inspiration isn't about theatrics. It's about truth. So here I was, microphone in hand, tie slightly crooked, sleeves rolled, and heart racing. I took a breath. When I was your age, I thought success looked a certain way. Clean shoes, perfect grades, the right last name. I thought it meant shaking hands at the country club and learning to smile at people who looked right through you. The students were quiet, which was rare, according to the principal. But the truth, I continued, success has nothing to do with how you look or what school your dad went to. It has everything to do with what you build when nobody believes in you. That got their attention. I stepped away from the podium and walked closer to the edge of the stage. Let me tell you a secret, I said, voice steady. People will doubt you, not because you're wrong, but because your dream makes them uncomfortable, especially when it doesn't come in the package they expect. I saw a kid in the second row, hoodie up, arms crossed, lean forward just slightly. When I started PulseLink, I said, I had no money. I was sharing a one-bedroom with two other guys. My family thought I was unemployed. My friends thought I was crazy. I was eating ramen 5 nights a week and teaching myself how to write hospital code because no one else would. But what kept me going, I said, wasn't the hope of getting rich. It was the idea that I could build something real, something that mattered. A girl near the back raised her hand. So, how do you know if it's going to work? The idea, I mean. I smiled. You don't, I said. That's the truth nobody tells you. You don't know. You just move anyway. You build anyway. You learn fast and fail faster. And you stay up until 3 a.m. fixing the thing no one else sees value in. Until one day they all see it. Heads nodded. A few took out notebooks. I paused. There are days, I said quietly, when I wanted to quit. Days when I looked at my bank account and thought maybe they were right. Days when rejection made me question everything. But here's what I've learned, I said, locking eyes with the hoodie kid in the second row. Your dream is a seed. And if you protect it long enough, even from the people you love, especially from them sometimes, it grows roots. And eventually, it grows louder than their doubt. The room stayed still. Then someone clapped. Then another. Then the whole room broke into applause. Not out of politeness, but recognition. Some of them had never heard words like that spoken directly to them before. After the speech, I stayed. A line of students formed, each with a different story, a different version of that same hunger. One girl told me she was learning to code on an old Chromebook. A boy said he was building a sneaker resale app from his bedroom. Another asked if I ever wanted to give up on my family entirely. I paused at that one. Sometimes, I said honestly, but then I realized I don't need to cut them out. I just need to draw my own circle and not let anyone shrink it. That afternoon, I left East Bronx High more inspired than I'd felt in months. Not because I had given a great speech, but because I'd seen something raw and familiar in those students. They were creators in the making, dreamers waiting for permission. And maybe, just maybe, I had given it to them. Later that night, I sat by my window again, watching the skyline, remembering that feeling from a year ago. The one where I thought success might finally quiet the noise inside me. But now I knew better. Success doesn't silence anything. It gives you a microphone. And when you have it, you better use it to tell someone else. Yes, it's possible. Even if they don't believe you yet. It was still dark when I arrived at the NASDAQ building in Times Square. The air was crisp with early April chill, the kind that cuts through your suit no matter how many layers you wear. But I barely noticed. My mind was elsewhere, caught between disbelief and quiet resolve. Today was IPO day. PulseLink Health was going public. I stood on the corner, looking up at the screen, the one that would soon flash our logo across 44th Street. They told me they'd show a clip from our CNN interview and highlight our patient impact numbers. I nodded at the time, but now, staring up at the glass and steel, I felt something unexpected, stillness. Jasmine joined me a few minutes later, Starbucks in hand. You ready to become a public company, Mr. CEO? She grinned. I gave a half smile. Ready as I'll ever be. She studied me. You don't look excited. You look haunted. I laughed. Not because she was wrong, but because she was too right. It's just, I said, this isn't the finish line. Everyone thinks it is. The money, the attention, the validation. But it's not the end. It's just a brighter spotlight. Jasmine nodded, and brighter lights cast longer shadows. We stood there in silence for a few moments, watching the first rays of sunlight filter between buildings before heading into the lobby. The prep room upstairs was a chaos of camera crews, media reps, NASDAQ officials, lawyers, and a makeup artist trying to powder down my forehead. Our leadership team was there too. Engineers who had worked 20-hour days, analysts who built financial models on hope, and Alicia, who had once interviewed for a job as my assistant, but had become the heartbeat of the company. She pulled me aside before the bell ceremony. I know this isn't your style, she said, but try to enjoy this. Just for today. I nodded. I'll try. The ceremony itself was a blur. Handshakes, countdowns, flashing lights. Someone handed me the ceremonial gavel and said, "Smile wide, Mr. Carter." And I did. For the cameras. For the story. But inside, my thoughts drifted, not to the numbers, not to the valuation, not to the market ticker rolling across the screens. I thought about that first version of PulseLink, built on a secondhand laptop in my apartment. I thought about the night I skipped Thanksgiving dinner because I was debugging a permissions loop. I thought about every no I heard before the first yes. And I thought about my uncle, the one who never got the appointment he needed in time. This was never supposed to be about ringing a bell. It was about changing the system. After the ceremony, I stepped out onto the balcony with Alicia. Below us, tourists stared up at the NASDAQ screen, now flashing PulseLink Health, PLSK, listed today in bold blue letters. Some cheered. Some were just waiting for the next billboard ad. Most didn't know what they were looking at. But we did. It feels different than I thought it would, I said quietly. How so? She asked. I thought it would feel like victory, like I'd finally arrived. But honestly, It feels like I've been handed a heavier baton. Now, there's 1,000 hospitals watching, patients counting on us, investors watching every move. That's because you're not chasing arrival anymore, she said. You're stewarding impact. I looked at her, my once assistant, now COO, and maybe the only person who really understood what this company meant to me. I'm glad we didn't take their money, I said. The family, she asked. I nodded. They offered. After the CNBC thing. Wanted a pre-IPO seat on the board. Thought it'd be strategic. Alicia chuckled. And you said? I said the board was full. With people who believe in us before we had headlines. She grinned. You're growing up, Carter. I smirked. Don't spread that rumor. Later that evening, after all the press interviews, the analyst calls, the champagne toasts, and the congratulatory texts from people who hadn't spoken to me in 5 years, I returned to my apartment. It was no longer the studio in Hoboken, but a loft in Tribeca overlooking the river. Still, I sat down on the same worn leather couch I'd carried with me since the early days. Some things I never replaced. I opened my laptop, not to check the stock price, but to reread an email from a nurse in Iowa. She'd written to say that PulseLink helped her clinic schedule neurology consults in under 48 hours. A kid with seizures had been seen and treated in time. We saved his future, she wrote, because of your platform. That was the real ticker I followed. Not the price. The people. I closed my laptop and leaned back. PulseLink was now a public company. But the mission? That would always remain private. It was never about the bell. It was always about what came after. It came in a plain white envelope. No return address. No logo. Just my name, handwritten in blue ink. I almost tossed it aside with the rest of the mail. Mostly IPO congratulations from banks I'd never spoken to and real estate brochures for properties I had no interest in. But something about the handwriting caught me. It looked familiar, slanted slightly right. Tight, deliberate strokes. When I opened it, a single sheet of paper fell out. And when I saw the first line, I stopped breathing. Dear Ryan, I don't know if you remember me. I'm your Uncle Peter's wife, Sandra. I sat down. Uncle Peter. The man who died waiting for a cardiology consult that never came. The man whose final weeks were filled with paperwork, voicemails, and frustration instead of care. He was the reason I built PulseLink. He never knew that. No one really did. Not even my parents. It was too painful to say out loud, let alone explain. I kept reading. I saw you on the news last week. I was drinking my morning coffee and nearly dropped the mug when your face appeared on the screen. They said your company is helping people get the care they need faster. That you've changed how hospitals schedule patients. I had to sit down. I don't know if you ever knew this, but Peter adored you. Not for what you achieved, for how your brain worked. He once told me, that boy's going to change something. Might not be the world, but it'll be something that matters. He believed in you before anyone else did. I stopped reading. The last time I saw Uncle Peter was at a family barbecue. I was 21. He was the only one who didn't ask what internship I'd landed. Instead, he said, still taking things apart to see how they work? When I nodded, he smiled wide and said, good. Most people stop doing that. You don't. That was the summer his heart condition worsened. The system failed him after that. The endless referrals, the rescheduled appointments, the insurance confusion. He died before a specialist ever called back. Back then, I was just a kid with anger and code. But his story gave me direction. He became the reason PulseLink had to exist. And now here I was, reading his wife's words, a full circle I didn't see coming. I don't want anything from you, Ryan. I just wanted you to know that when I saw your company's name, I felt something I haven't felt in years, peace. Because while the system failed him, you didn't. You used your grief to fix the very thing that took him from us. That matters. More than any headline. More than any bell rung on Wall Street. Thank you for not letting what happened to Peter become just another sad story. You turned it into a solution. He would have been proud. I am too. With love, Sandra. I folded the letter and stared out the window. For a long time, I didn't move. The world kept spinning. Emails pinged, Slack notifications buzzed, market graphs ticked up and down, but I stayed still. Grief is strange. It doesn't follow logic. Sometimes it shows up not in waves, but in still water. Quiet, reflective, unrelenting. I'd spent years building something to make sure what happened to Uncle Peter wouldn't happen again. But I'd never let myself fully feel the loss. I turned it into code, into strategy decks, into hospital contracts. But that letter? That cracked it wide open. I got up, went to the shelf in my office, and pulled out an old photo album. It hadn't been opened in years. Inside was a picture of Uncle Peter, arm around me, both of us grinning. I was 10. We were in the garage, holding a toaster I had just taken apart. I remember that moment, because everyone else told me to stop making a mess. He told me to keep going. That night, I wrote Sandra back. Not by email, by hand. Dear Sandra, I remember everything. Your letter reached me on a day I didn't know I needed it. Thank you. For the memory. For the peace. For believing in a version of me no one else saw yet. Uncle Peter changed my life in ways he never knew. I only hope Pulse Link continues to honor him. With all my gratitude, Ryan. I mailed it the next morning. No return address. Just my name in blue ink. And for the first time since the IPO, I didn't feel like a CEO trying to manage growth or market expectations. I felt like a nephew who finally got to say thank you. It started with a voicemail. I hadn't spoken to Madison in months. Not since that surreal family dinner when my IPO valuation suddenly made me part of the legacy again. She'd texted after the IPO, left a few polite messages, even sent me a photo of her wedding invitation. White linen, gold embossing, the works. I RSVP'd no, not out of anger, out of clarity. But that afternoon, her voice floated into my inbox again, sugary and polished. Hey Ryan, it's Maddie. I know you've been swamped, but I'd love to grab coffee. It's nothing formal, just a quick catch-up. Brian has some exciting policy ideas he wants to run by you. He's been thinking a lot about healthcare access, and well, your name came up. Call me. I stared at my phone for a while, then dropped it face down on the desk. Brian Langston, Yale Law, great teeth. A handshake like a press release. He was exactly the kind of man my parents approved of. The kind who said the right things in public and calculated every word in private. He was running for state senate now, backed by old money, emerging tech donors, and my sister's wedding ring. And now, apparently, they needed me. I didn't return the call. Instead, I went back to reviewing a new pilot contract for a regional health system in Michigan. That was real work, ground-level work, not politics, not posturing. But 2 days later, they showed up. In person. I had just stepped out of a product review meeting when Jasmine met me in the hallway with a tight-lipped smile. They're here, she said. Ooh, your sister, and her very ambitious plus one. I sighed. They didn't have an appointment. They said it was urgent, and that they'd wait. I considered sending them away, but something in me, curiosity, maybe said, give me 5 minutes, then bring them in. When Madison and Brian walked into my office, they did so like they owned it. Madison in a soft blue coat, makeup flawless, heels clicking like punctuation marks. Brian in a tailored navy suit and campaign pin that read Langston for change. Ryan, Madison said, with the warmth of someone trying to rewrite history. You look great. IPO Life agrees with you. I nodded. Let's skip the pleasantries. What do you need? Brian spoke first. Ryan, I'll get right to the point. My team is crafting a new healthcare initiative, statewide policy on equitable access. And PulseLink is, well, it's exactly the kind of innovation we want to feature. In fact, we're thinking of centering the policy launch around a real-world example. A success story. He smiled. You, Madison chimed in. It would be so powerful. You'd be the face of modern healthcare transformation. And of course, we'd coordinate all media exposure. Press, interviews, partnerships. It's a win-win. I leaned back. And what exactly are you asking me to do? Brian didn't blink. A joint press conference. A campaign ad. Possibly a panel appearance with our policy advisory board. Maybe a short feature video showing PulseLink in action. And I asked, eyes narrowing, what do you want from PulseLink itself? Madison's voice softened. A pilot partnership. Just optics, really. You don't even need to change the workflow. We'd frame it as a public-private collaboration. And if the campaign goes well, there could be federal connections down the line. Brian's already in touch with some people on Capitol Hill. I sat there, staring at them. Two perfectly framed faces. Two polished lives, built on optics and access. And now they wanted to borrow my company's credibility to give their politics a heartbeat. I spoke quietly. No. Brian blinked. I'm sorry. I said no. I repeated. PulseLink doesn't do politics. We serve patients. Period. Madison's smile faded. Ryan, don't be rash. This could elevate you. National visibility. Strategic alliances. Think long-term. I said. And long-term, I don't want PulseLink's name printed next to any politician's promises. Especially ones I didn't write. Brian's tone hardened. You'd really turn down this opportunity? For what purity? No, I said, standing now. For integrity. Madison looked hurt. For a second, genuinely. You always think we're trying to use you, she said. No, I said. I think you're trying to use what I built, now that it's finally valuable to you. And that's the difference. Brian stood, buttoning his jacket. We were trying to help you. No, I said evenly. You were trying to help yourselves. They left without another word. I didn't watch them go. That evening, as I reviewed hospital analytics and response times from our newest Midwest rollout, I felt something deeper than relief. I felt clean, uncompromised. For so long, I'd wanted to be seen. Now I knew. Being seen by the wrong eyes could cost you more than being invisible ever did. And sometimes, protecting what you've built means protecting it, even from your own blood. 3 days after Madison and Brian left my office, the headlines started rolling in. At first, it was subtle. A few opinion pieces buried deep on political blogs. Speculative whispers. Then it grew louder. A national healthcare columnist shared a scathing tweet suggesting that certain CEOs refused to support bipartisan health policy out of ego or greed. No names, but enough breadcrumbs for anyone to follow the trail back to PulseLink. By the end of the week, I was being painted as the new poster child for tech arrogance. It wasn't true, but it didn't have to be. That's how narratives work in this world. They don't wait for facts. They don't knock before entering your life. They show up, loud and relentless, until your silence becomes guilt and your integrity becomes suspicion. The tipping point came when Brian's campaign quietly released a video. Just 30 seconds long. A soft montage of hospital workers, children with bandaged arms, smiling doctors. The voiceover was smooth. In a world where too many look away, we need leaders who step forward. We reached out to one of the biggest health tech voices in the country and got silence. They never said my name, but the PulseLink logo, barely blurred in the background of one of the stock clips, said enough. Jasmine burst into my office holding a tablet. You need to respond, she said, her voice tight. I looked up. If I engage, I legitimize it. And if you don't, she countered, you lose control of the story. She was right. She often was. But I hesitated. It wasn't about damage control. It wasn't even about reputation anymore. It was about the line. The invisible one between being principled and being passive. I had spent years fighting for a voice. Now that I had it, the world was demanding to know what I stood for. Not in boardrooms, not in pitch decks, but publicly, visibly, audibly. I stayed up that night alone in the office, staring at a blank Word document, then finally wrote something that didn't feel like spin or defense. Just truth. The next morning, I posted it on PulseLink's official site and my own social media. When silence is weaponized, words must become armor. Recently, I declined to support a political campaign that asked to use my company as part of its healthcare messaging. The request was polished, strategic, and framed as an opportunity. But here's what I believe. Healthcare is not a platform for political theater. Patients aren't props, and PulseLink was not built to serve agendas. It was built to serve people. Yes, we want systemic change. Yes, we welcome partnership, but not at the cost of truth, and not as a backdrop for ambition. Integrity isn't always loud, but sometimes, when necessary, it needs to be heard. This is me choosing to be heard. The post went viral. Some praised it. Others dragged it through the mud. That's how internet discourse works. Fact wrapped in fire, nuance drowned in noise. But the calls I got that day mattered more than any tweet. One came from a CEO of a rural hospital in Montana who said, "We don't get caught up in politics out here. We just want the damn appointments to show up. Thank you for building something that does that." Another came from a nonprofit clinic in Atlanta that had just onboard Pulse Link and saw their specialist match rate increase by 43%. And then there was the call I never expected. A woman's voice on the other end. Soft. Southern. Tired. Mr. Carter? Yes. My name is Eliza. I run a small pediatric clinic in Tennessee. We just started using Pulse Link last month. My staff's overworked. My daughter's my IT person. And I saw the campaign video. Then I read your statement. I waited. I just wanted to say, I believe you. And I believe in what you're building. Please don't stop. We need you. It wasn't a big donor. It wasn't an article in the Times. It was a stranger, but meant more than either. That night, I sat on my rooftop, a glass of scotch in hand, the skyline glittering like it always does when the city pretends to be peaceful. I thought about what it costs to stand still when everyone demands movement. What it means to be misunderstood on purpose. I wasn't angry at Madison anymore, or Brian. They were just playing the game they were born into. But I learned long ago I don't do politics. I build systems. I fix broken things. And most of all, I protect the people who count on those things to work. That would never change. Let them shout. I'll build quietly. But when I speak, they'll know I mean it. It was a Thursday afternoon, raining just enough to blur the edges of the city. I had ducked into a quiet bookstore cafe in the West Village. One of those hidden spots I used to visit before the IPO, back when my name meant nothing and my mind was noisy with code and caffeine. Jasmine had forced me to take the afternoon off. Recharge, she said, pointing a finger at me like I was a dying phone battery. You're no good to anyone if you burn out. So here I was. Hoodie up, phone off, a stack of untouched novels on the table, and a half-sipped espresso cooling beside them. I was just about to leave when I heard a voice behind me. Soft. Familiar. A name, not a title. Ryan. I turned, and there she was. Elena Moore. The one person I hadn't expected to see again. Not in this lifetime, not in this city, not like this. She was standing in the entrance, hair damp from the rain, holding a red umbrella and a look of cautious surprise. The years had touched her gently. Still the same thoughtful eyes, the same quiet presence that once anchored me when everything else felt unsteady. Elena, I said, standing up. Wow, she whispered, stepping closer. It really is you. We stood in the middle of a narrow cafe, the world spinning in slow motion around us. We dated for 2 years in grad school. She was studying bioinformatics. I was deep in systems engineering. We shared a studio apartment, too many ramen dinners, and dreams that felt ridiculous at the time. She wanted to build a data model that could predict autoimmune flares weeks in advance. I just wanted PulseLink to exist. We broke up when the reality of our ambitions clashed with the limits of time and attention. I chose the startup. She chose a fellowship abroad. We never said goodbye the right way. Just silence, slowly stretching across time zones until it became habit. Now here we were again. I didn't expect to see you, she said, finally sitting down across from me. I come here when I need to disappear, I said. Seems like you do too. I live around the corner now. Just moved back from Geneva. She paused, then smiled. Saw you on CNBC a few weeks ago. Didn't recognize the suit, but the eyes gave it away. I laughed. Yeah, they make you wear one when the stock hits 9 figures. Congratulations, she said gently. PulseLink looks incredible. Thanks, I said. Still can't believe it's real some days. She looked down at the table, fingers tracing the edge of a coffee cup. I always knew you'd do it. I just didn't think I'd be watching from a continent away. There was no bitterness in her voice. Just memory. Just wait. I never stopped believing in what you were building, she continued. I just didn't know if there would ever be room in your world for anything else. I didn't respond right away, because the truth stung more than I expected. There hadn't been room. Not then. Not for anything that didn't scale. I think about that a lot, I finally said. About what it cost to get here. Elena nodded. Me too. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was honest. Familiar in a way I hadn't felt in years. How's your research? I asked. I'm at NYU now, she replied. Working on a predictive model for chronic inflammation. Small team. Big vision. Sound familiar? I smiled. Sounds like exactly the kind of thing PulseLink should be integrating. She looked up. Would you actually consider it? If it came from you? I said, I consider anything. Her cheeks flushed, just slightly. I always wondered, she said, if we'd ever talk again. Not because I needed closure, just to know that we mattered, even if only for a while. I leaned back, studying her. You did. You still do. Another silence. This one gentler, like rain tapping on windows. What now? She asked. I don't know, I admitted. I've spent years building a company, building walls. Now I'm starting to wonder what I built them to protect, and what they've kept out. She looked at me for a long time, then stood. I'm around, she said. Same number, same coffee shop. Then she paused. Just let me know when the walls come down. And with that, she was gone. I sat there for a long time after she left, watching the umbrella disappear into the street, wondering if second chances were things you earned or things you chose to believe in again. That night, I didn't go back to the office. I turned off my phone, ordered takeout, sat in my apartment staring at the city like it held answers. And I wrote something in my notebook I hadn't written in years. Was success, really, if you're still the only one in the room when it arrives? I didn't know yet. But maybe, just maybe, I was ready to find out. Monday morning started like most others. Meeting stacked, inbox full, Jasmine 3 steps ahead of everything I hadn't even thought of yet. But something was different. There was a quiet hum running beneath the usual Pulse Link rhythm. Not the kind of buzz that came with product launches or press leaks. This was deeper, more personal. And I felt at the moment Jasmine walked into my office holding a tablet, her brow slightly furrowed. You're going to want to see this, she said. She handed me the device. On the screen was a project proposal marked priority review, NYU collaboration submission. At the top, lead investigator, Dr. Elena Moore. I stared at it, pulse tightening. It wasn't a pitch. It was a breakthrough. Elena's team had developed an adaptive learning model capable of predicting autoimmune flare patterns weeks in advance using patient-reported data and historical lab results, something no EMR system had successfully achieved. And they weren't looking to sell it. They were offering exclusive integration with Pulse Link. I had no idea she was submitting this, I said. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. You mean Dr. Moore? Or Elena? I didn't answer. Look, she continued, keeping her tone neutral, it's a solid proposal. Maybe the most promising we've seen all quarter. But if this is going to get personal, it won't, I said quickly. She waited. I nodded. It won't. I repeated, more sure this time. Book the meeting. 3 days later, Elena walked into the Pulse Link boardroom with her team, 2 junior researchers, a grant manager, and a quiet confidence that somehow unsettled me more than any investor ever had. She was different in this setting. Not the girl from rainy bookstores. Not the memory I'd carried in quiet places. She was a force, and she owned the room like she'd never left it. Thank you for the opportunity, she began, her voice calm but direct. We believe this model can radically reduce unnecessary ER visits and improve chronic care outcomes, especially for underserved populations. She moved through slides, data, predictive accuracy rates, case studies from early-stage trials. I watched the others in the room, my CTO, the product leads, even our CFO, nodding, engaged. This wasn't nostalgia. This was innovation. And I was proud, not just of the tech, of her. When the presentation ended, I cleared my throat. Dr. Moore, I said, keeping it professional, what you've built is remarkable. I'd like to discuss what integration would look like within Pulse Link's core engine: timeline, governance, data compliance. She met my gaze, steady as ever. We've already mapped a compatibility layer, she said. Our model sits on the periphery of clinical data. We designed it with Pulse Link's framework in mind. There was a pause in the room, one of those rare moments when everything clicked. Let's move to phase 2, I said. Due diligence, then pilot. You've got our attention. Her team smiled. Elena simply nodded. Appreciate it, Mr. Carter. When the room cleared, she lingered. Just a second too long. And that's when it became real again. When the door closed behind the others, she exhaled slowly. That was surreal, she said. You owned it, I replied. Like I knew you would. A pause. I didn't plan this, she added. When we submitted, I didn't know Pulse Link would be the one reviewing. I swear. I believe you, I said. And it wouldn't have mattered. Another pause. This changes things, doesn't it? She asked, not looking away. It doesn't have to, I said. She smiled softly. You're a CEO, Ryan. I'm a lead researcher under contract with a public university. There are rules. I've broken bigger ones, I said, half teasing. But she didn't laugh. Don't, she said quietly. Not yet. And I understood. The timing was delicate now. The work came first. The mission we both shared, the one that outlived our past, was too important to jeopardize. We weren't just two people catching up anymore. We were two professionals standing on opposite sides of a very thin line. That evening, I walked out of the building later than usual. The city glowed gold, and the air had that crispness that hinted spring was surrendering to summer. I stopped by the same cafe where we'd met days earlier, ordered 2 drinks out of habit, sat at the table by the window, and watched the door. But she didn't come, and I didn't text her, because sometimes the most important relationships aren't the ones that consume us, but the ones that teach us patience, and timing, and restraint, especially when the stakes are bigger than the people involved. I sipped my coffee, watched the rain begin to fall again, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the urge to fix everything. Some stories are better when they unfold slowly. And this one, whatever it was becoming, deserved to breathe. The headline hit me like a slap. Too close for comfort. PulseLink CEO pushes deal with former Flame turned research partner. The Verge, 7:12 a.m. By 8 o'clock, my inbox was on fire. By 9 o'clock, Jasmine was pacing outside my office with 2 PR statements, a media freeze memo, and a look that said, "We have a problem." But I already knew that. It started as a whisper, a few gossip forums, an anonymous quote from a source close to PulseLink leadership. Then it moved faster than we could catch. Tech blogs, finance outlets, even LinkedIn commentary threads laced with passive-aggressive phrasing like ethics matter at scale. The story wasn't true. Not in the way they painted it. There were no secret deals, no hidden favors. Elena's model was objectively brilliant. Her team had done the work. We had followed every protocol. But the facts didn't matter now. The optics did. I sat in the boardroom, facing 6 of my senior team members, all staring at me like I'd brought a virus into the bloodstream. Look, I began, trying to keep my tone measured. I know this is uncomfortable, but we're not here because of a mistake. We're here because the media found a narrative that sells. Dan, our legal counsel, leaned forward. The question isn't whether she earned the collaboration. She did. The question is whether you disclosed the personal history early enough to avoid a conflict of interest claim. I bristled. There's no conflict. We're not involved. We hadn't spoken in years before that bookstore. Then why didn't you tell us? Dan pressed. Why let it become a story? Jasmine interrupted gently. Because maybe you didn't think it was a story until someone else wrote it. I glanced at her, grateful. Still, I felt the tension tightening like wire around my ribs. This was the price of visibility. The closer you got to doing something meaningful, the more people wanted to question your motives. And the lonelier it got at the top. I walked out of the meeting with a dozen action items and one heavy silence that followed me all the way back to my office. The door clicked shut behind me like a verdict. I hadn't texted Elena. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know what to say. How do you tell someone, hey, the thing you worked your whole career for? It's being reduced to a rumor because we used to care about each other. But before I could write anything, my office phone rang. Not my cell. Not Jasmine's line. The old phone, landline, rarely used, rarely ringing. I picked it up. Ryan Carter. Hi, came Elena's voice. Calm, controlled, measured. So, I saw it. I closed my eyes. Elena. Don't, she said gently. You don't owe me an apology. Yes, I do, I said. Because the truth shouldn't hurt someone who's done nothing wrong. She was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke again, softer now. You know what hurts, Ryan? Not the headline. Not the speculation. What hurts is that what we built, what we've been working on, is suddenly no longer about the science. It's about us. Or some version of us people think they understand. I leaned back, hand gripping the armrest. Elena, we can push back. Clarify everything. Release a joint statement. I'll go on record. No, she said. Not yet. If you do that, it becomes a war. And I'm not interested in fighting shadows. What are you saying? I'm saying, let's give this a minute to breathe. That stung more than I expected. But she wasn't wrong. Will you be okay? I asked. She gave a soft laugh. I've survived worse. I've survived men in power ignoring my work. If I have to survive people noticing it for the wrong reasons, so be it. Elena, focus on what matters, she said, cutting me off gently. The mission, the platform, the hospital's counting on you. Let this pass. If it doesn't, then we'll talk. The line went dead, and for a few seconds, the silence in my office was louder than any headline. That night, I sat alone on the rooftop terrace, watching the lights of the city blink like heartbeats. I thought about how easily the truth gets twisted when ambition and intimacy occupy the same space. About how difficult it is to be seen as whole when the world prefers you broken into headlines. But most of all, I thought about Elena, choosing grace when she could have chosen outrage, choosing silence when the world demanded a spectacle. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't fully admitted before. I wasn't afraid of losing the company. I was afraid of losing her. Not because of love, not yet, but because in a world of false urgency and transactional loyalty, she reminded me what it looked like to stand for something quietly, steadily, unshaken. The next morning, I showed up at the office an hour early, not to draft a press release, not to stage a counterattack, but to meet with the engineering team, because the best way to prove my intentions was to keep building exactly what I said we were building, and let the results speak louder than the rumors. The ballroom at the Boston Medical Innovation Summit was packed. Physicians, hospital administrators, researchers, venture capitalists, health tech founders, the kind of crowd that could make or break an idea in a single panel session. PulseLink had been attending the event for 3 years, but this was the first time we were a featured partner. Our platform had just crossed a major milestone. Over 500 hospital systems on board. 50,000 patient specialist matches per day. Clinical outcomes beginning to shift. But today wasn't about PulseLink. It was about Elena. She was the keynote speaker on day 2. Her session was titled, Predictive Empathy, Using Data to Anticipate Patient Needs Before Symptoms Speak. I sat in the third row, deliberately unannounced, dressed in a quiet navy sweater and jeans. No name tag. No entourage, just a notepad and the uncomfortable awareness that half the room might be whispering about me under their breath. The media storm had died down mostly. A few publications issued quiet retractions. Some never corrected anything at all. But in the eyes of the public, the narrative had already faded, replaced by fresher controversies, newer clickbait. Elena had stayed quiet through it all. Until now. She stepped onto the stage with the calm of someone who had already survived the fire. Her blazer was black, minimal. No PowerPoint, no flashy opening video. Just her, a microphone, in a room full of people waiting to decide if they should believe her. She began softly. I'm not here to tell you that machine learning will fix healthcare. Pause. A few eyebrows raised. I'm here to remind you that medicine began with listening, before there were monitors, or biomarkers, or AI dashboards. A patient said, something feels wrong, and a healer tried to understand. That held the room. Elena continued, walking slowly across the stage like she was thinking aloud. We're now in an era where data can listen more consistently than humans. But it cannot care. It cannot reassure. It cannot notice the subtle tremor in a patient's voice when they say they're fine, but mean the opposite. She turned, faced the audience directly. What our team has built is not a miracle algorithm. It's a bridge between the messy, emotional experience of illness and the cold, clean logic of data. It learns from patterns. It anticipates. It doesn't replace a physician's wisdom. It enhances it. It whispers, look again. I could feel the shift in the room. Skepticism softening. Posture relaxing. She wasn't trying to prove herself anymore. She was simply telling the truth. I know there's been speculation about my collaboration with PulseLink, she added, her tone firm but unbothered. And I'll address it once, because this field deserves transparency. Now the room leaned in. I submitted my research before I ever reconnected with their CEO. I did not ask for favors. I did not receive special treatment. And when the partnership moved forward, I followed the same rules I would have followed for any company. Rules built not to protect egos, but to protect patients. A pause. And then, if we begin punishing collaboration simply because it makes a good headline, we'll kill the very thing innovation requires most: trust. Applause. Not polite. Not obligatory. Genuine. She nodded once. Let the silence return. And finished. I'm not here to be impressive. I'm here to be useful. If this model helps even one provider look again, if it prevents even one child from ending up in an ER because someone missed a warning sign, then that's enough for me. She stepped back, and the room rose with her. Not everyone, not instantly, but enough. Enough to know the tide had turned. She didn't look for me in the crowd, and I didn't approach her backstage, because today wasn't about us. It was about the work. That evening, I sat alone in the hotel bar, watching the lights from the harbor blink across the water. My phone buzzed once. Text from Elena. Thank you for not stepping in. I needed that one to be mine. I stared at the message for a long time, then replied, It always was. We didn't meet up that night. No dramatic rooftop reconnection. No whispered confessions over wine. Just a quiet moment of shared understanding. Two people who had grown enough to let something be exactly what it needed to be. The next day, PulseLink signed its largest partnership deal to date. But no one in the press asked about personal entanglements anymore. They asked about data, about outcomes, about systems working better because people like Elena refused to let them stay broken. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to explain who we were. We were builders. And a work? It was finally speaking for itself. The email came in on a Thursday. Subject line, United States Department of Health and Human Services, RFI response proposal. Jasmine brought it into our morning sync with her usual efficiency, but I could already read the energy behind her words before she said anything. You need to read this carefully, she said. And slowly. She wasn't wrong. The government wanted PulseLink, not as a vendor, as an infrastructure partner. The pitch was staggering. A 5-year, $420 million federal contract. National implementation of PulseLink across all VA hospitals, community clinics, Medicaid facilities. Tens of millions of users. Centralized diagnostics. Predictive care at scale. In theory, it was everything we dreamed of. But then came the caveat. Access. Not just aggregate data. Not just performance metrics. The contract outlined conditional access to anonymized user-level behavioral health interactions and predictive stratification models with modifiable parameters under federal audit. Translated? They wanted to tinker with the engine. They wanted to see how our AI made decisions and, if needed, override those decisions. And once you let someone else hold the pen in your algorithm, it's no longer your algorithm. I sat in my office, staring at the ceiling, the city humming outside like a beast we'd tried to tame but never fully understood. Jasmine walked in without knocking, only ever doing that when she was worried I'd drift too far into thought. They'll call this a turning point, she said. Whatever you decide, either we become a public utility or we prove we were never trying to be one. They'll say we're arrogant, I replied, if we say no. They already say that, she countered. You didn't build PulseLink to be liked, Ryan. You built it because too many people were falling through cracks and calling it a system. I nodded, but the weight didn't lift. Because here was the truth. I wanted it. Not for ego, for reach. For the idea that maybe no child would wait 6 months for a diagnosis. That no elderly patient would bounce between 5 doctors before someone finally noticed the decline. But then I thought of a woman in Ohio who'd written us last year, thanking us for matching her son with a specialist 2 states away after years of local clinics brushing off his symptoms. Her final line echoed in my head. I don't care how the tech works. I just need to know it's on our side. And that was the problem. Because once we said yes to the government, even if their intentions were noble, PulseLink might no longer be on our side. The next day, I called a leadership summit. 32 people. My inner circle. Department heads. Legal. Product. Elena joined via video, silent in the corner box of the screen until I invited her to speak. This is a crossroads, I said. If we move forward, we go from builders to operators. If we say no, we may never get another shot this big again. The room was silent. Elena finally spoke. I left government work for a reason, she said. It's not corruption. It's dilution. Good intentions become policies. Policies become exceptions. Exceptions become loopholes. She paused. If they touch the engine, she added, they'll eventually shape it. Jasmine leaned forward. And if we give them the keys now, who do we say no to next? Dan, our legal counsel, added one more dagger. Once they're inside, they'll have precedent. You'll be asked to justify why the Department of Defense shouldn't get the same access, or state governments, or pharmaceutical partners. I looked around the room. No one was saying yes, but no one wanted to say no either. Because how do you look at a chance to help millions and say, not like this? I ended the meeting early. No decision made, no press statement prepared. That night, I walked the edge of the East River, past the ferry docks and the overpriced restaurants with glass walls. The water was dark and angry, or maybe it just reflected me. Success is a strange creature. At first, it asks everything of you, your time, your sleep, your doubts. And then, when you finally give it everything, it begins to ask for more. Things you never thought you'd trade. Things like principle, like trust, like the very reason you started in the first place. I sat on a bench, the wind cutting sharp off the water. And I asked myself the hardest question yet. Would you rather help 10 million people a little, or one person completely? Because maybe the answer wasn't scale. Maybe the answer was depth. Maybe it always had been. They gave me 12 minutes. That's what the conference organizer told me. You'll have 12 minutes on stage during the Leadership Futures panel. That's it. Then Q&A. 12 minutes to explain why we were walking away from $420 million. 12 minutes to justify a no. Jasmine offered to write the remarks. I thanked her, but declined. This one had to come from me. Raw, undiluted. No rehearsed quotes or legal phrasing. The night before the panel, I barely slept. Not because I doubted the decision, but because I knew what it would cost. Investors would pull back. The press would call it arrogant. Competitors would pounce. And yet, beneath all that noise, I felt something unfamiliar. Peace. That morning, I stepped onto the stage in front of 3,000 executives, clinicians, and journalists. The room smelled like polished wood, old money, and cautious curiosity. I didn't start with a joke. I didn't show a slide. I just told the truth. When we started Pulse Link, I had one goal: make healthcare feel less like a machine. I didn't want patients waiting in broken systems. I didn't want doctors blind to patterns. I didn't want families Googling symptoms in parking lots because they couldn't get appointments. A few nods in the crowd. A few pens stilled. We built something that worked. And then the world came calling. I looked at the front row, government reps, corporate partners, familiar suits. And last month, we were offered a contract that could have scaled our platform nationwide. It would have transformed Pulse Link into a national backbone for digital health access. Tens of millions of lives touched. I let that hang. And we said no. A ripple across the audience. Uneasy shifting. Eyebrows raised. We said no because the contract required access. Not to outcomes. Not to analytics. But to the very logic that guides our system's decisions. And that access came with a clause, the ability to alter how our algorithms work. I paused, letting the silence stretch. We didn't build Pulse Link to be reprogrammed by committee. Soft murmurs. Someone scribbled fast in the second row. I understand the argument. If you want to help more people, play by the system's rules. But here's the flaw in that thinking. The system's rules are why we had to build Pulse Link in the first place. A beat. You don't fix a broken compass by following it. Now, there were nods. Slower this time. Less out of agreement. More out of recognition. I'm not here to criticize public health. I'm here to say that independence isn't ego, it's protection. It's our way of ensuring that every patient who touches our platform knows one thing. The system is working for them, not on them. Then I folded my note card and placed it in my pocket. We'll keep building. We'll keep reaching hospitals that need us. We'll keep serving patients who don't have time to wait, but we will not compromise the integrity of what makes us different. A full stop. No applause. Not yet. Just silence. And in that moment, I didn't hear rejection. I heard respect. It came slowly, like a wave, unsure of the shore. Then hands started to come together. Not loud, not explosive, but steady, real. After the session, a physician from Detroit approached me. She looked tired, like someone who hadn't had a vacation in years. "You just said what half of us feel but can't say out loud," she whispered. "Thank you for not selling out." Later that day, 3 hospital systems reached out asking to accelerate integration. One of them had been on the fence for 6 months. By evening, our inbox was flooded. Some messages called me reckless. Some called me a fool. But others said things I'd never forget. I finally trust someone in tech again. My daughter uses Pulse Link. Now I know she's safe. Thank you for choosing the hard no. That night, I walked alone back to my hotel. No entourage, no press, just me, a quiet sidewalk, and a decision that didn't need applause to feel right. In the room, my phone buzzed. Text from Elena. "They'll never understand the cost of that decision." But I do. I replied. It was never just about them understanding. It was about us remembering. I set the phone down, poured a glass of water, and for the first time since the offer came in, I slept. Not heavily, but peacefully, like a man who'd chosen his line in the sand, and didn't regret it. It came 3 days after the speech. A simple email, almost lost in the flood of media requests and investor follow-ups. Subject: invitation to collaborate, Medicines de l'Avenir. Doctors of the Future, Geneva. At first, I assumed it was another consulting outfit hoping to use our name. I almost deleted it, but something about the wording made me pause. The email wasn't flashy. No branding. No pitch deck attached. Just a note from someone named Dr. Soren Leclerc, stating that he'd seen my address at the Boston Summit and would like to discuss an unconventional opportunity for real impact. He included a Zoom link. No pressure. No urgency. Just an open door. I clicked. The next day, I met him on screen, a tall man in his early 60s with white, unbrushed hair and eyes that seemed to carry more decades of field medicine than most physicians dared attempt. Behind him was a sparse office, a map of sub-Saharan Africa on the wall, and the unmistakable hum of something more real than corporate health tech. "Mr. Carter," he said, with a thick French accent softened by years of international living. "You gave a speech last week that reached further than you think." "I didn't expect it to," I replied honestly. "Good," he said. "The best words are the ones spoken without expectation." He leaned forward. "I lead Medicines de l'Avenir," he continued. "We're a non-profit coalition of doctors, technologists, and mobile care units working in high-need zones across 11 countries. Mostly refugee corridors, areas without digital health infrastructure. We watch every new health tech rise and fall from a distance. Most companies say they want to help. You're the first we've seen turn down power to protect the purpose." I blinked. "I appreciate that," I said carefully. "But what does that have to do with Pulse Link?" He smiled. "It has everything to do with Pulse Link. We want to bring your model, your engine, your triage algorithms to places that have never had triage at all. No EMRs, no data, just patients, diseases, and guesswork." I hesitated. "That's not what we're designed for. Our system was trained on U.S. data. Hospital systems. Integration APIs. There's no architecture over there." He nodded. "We know. We'll build the bridge together." I leaned back, processing. This wasn't a licensing deal. It was a mission. "Let me be clear," I said. "There's no profit in this for you. No marketing win. No coverage in Wired or Forbes." "Why me?" He shrugged. "Because you said no to something big. That means you might say yes to something honest." I sat in silence for a moment, watching the faint warble of his office fan behind him. I remembered Elena's voice in my head. The system's rules are why we had to build Pulse Link in the first place. Maybe this was the next chapter. Not in growth, but in service. "We'll need to rework the AI for low-data environments," I said slowly. "Rethink language layers, UI simplification, build mobile first, use solar energy, offline caching. Your team can handle that? He asked. I nodded. They'll ask why, I added. Why now? Why leave U.S. markets and go off-grid? Soren smiled. Tell them it's not a detour. It's a compass check. We ended the call with no paperwork. No NDAs. Just a shared silence that felt like a promise. That evening, I called Elena. She answered on the second ring. I think I know where we're going next, I said. And for the first time in months, I heard her laugh. Not polite, not careful. Genuine. Where? She asked. I told her. She didn't hesitate. I'll start building the field layer model tomorrow. No questions. No doubts. Just movement. Just trust. 2 weeks later, I stood in a bare, sun-baked compound on the outskirts of Juba, South Sudan. No conference rooms. No suits. Just medical tents. Children laughing. Women waiting patiently for the van that carried hope instead of delay. A nurse handed me a tablet, one of our modified pulse-link devices. Solar-powered. Operated on a system stripped down to the core. Symptom input, urgency calculation, multilingual support. Simple. Effective. The first patient stepped forward, and the algorithm worked. No headlines. No applause. Just care. And in that moment, watching a mother nod in relief as she was guided toward the right tent, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not success. Not victory. But rightness. We hadn't changed the world. But in this place for this woman, at this moment, we'd done something that mattered. And for once, that was enough. The heat in Juba was unrelenting. It wasn't just the kind of heat that made your shirt stick to your back or turned every bottle of water lukewarm within minutes. It was the kind that lived in the air, dense, ancient, stubborn. It clung to the buildings, the tents, the people. It reminded you that nothing here moved unless it absolutely had to. And yet, PulseLink was moving. 2 weeks into deployment, our stripped-down triage system was now live in 4 rural clinics. Solar-powered tablets loaded with a simplified, offline first version of our engine. No animations. No dashboards. Just clinical logic. Smart, fast, quiet. And for a while, it was working. More patients were being seen in less time. Critical cases were identified faster. Language modules were auto-adjusting. Even our on-the-ground translators were shocked by the algorithm's adaptability. But then came the day the system stopped being enough. It was mid-afternoon when a young girl, maybe 10 years old, was brought in by her uncle. Her name was Ao. Thin. Too quiet. Her eyes didn't focus. Her legs trembled as she walked. Elena ran the initial triage herself. Fever, intermittent. Blood pressure, stable but low. Oxygen saturation, acceptable. The tablet recommended a Tier 3 referral, urgent but not emergency. Elena frowned. Something's off, she murmured. She's dehydrated, but the rest of the metrics aren't matching what I'm seeing. I looked at the screen. The system had flagged mild anemia and recommended oral hydration and reevaluation in 24 hours. But Ao's hand was shaking. Her breath came too fast. And her uncle, though calm, kept repeating something in Bari that our translator loosely rendered as, "She dreams with her eyes open." That wasn't a symptom PulseLink could process. Elena stood up. "We need a test for cerebral malaria." I hesitated, but the algorithm didn't. I don't care what it didn't. Look at her. This is advanced stage. If we wait, she won't make it through the night. I nodded, and she rushed the child to the tent behind us. But the local nurse, a woman named Adea, who'd been with Medicines de l'Avenir for 9 years, stepped in front of Elena's path. Her arms crossed. "She cannot go in," Adea said. Elena froze. "Why not?" "The mother didn't give consent," she replied calmly. "Only the uncle brought her. The mother has not permitted blood draws." Elena blinked. "She's unconscious." "I know," Adea replied. "But in this village, that still means her spirit is present. Her word is still law." Elena looked at me. "We don't have time for protocol." But I saw the conflict in Adea's eyes, and I understood something we hadn't anticipated. We weren't just fighting disease here. We were fighting the limits of understanding, ours and theirs. I stepped forward. "Can I speak to the village elder?" I asked quietly. An hour later, I found myself kneeling on a reed mat inside a circular hut with walls of packed earth and a single lantern casting shadows across the floor. The elder, a man named Musa, listened as I explained what we wanted to do. When I finished, he simply said, "Will the machine heal her?" "No," I answered honestly, but it helped us see the problem sooner. He was quiet for a long time. Then, finally, he nodded once. "You may take the child, but no needles until her mother sees her awake again." Back at the clinic, Elena administered the only thing she could without blood work for fluids, antipyretics, and oxygen support. She sat by AO's side all night. I watched her, tired, tense, unshaken. At dawn, AO stirred. Her eyes opened. She whispered something and smiled. Later that morning, the mother arrived. Wrinkled, stoic, unreadable. She sat next to her daughter, placed a hand on her chest, then turned to Elena. "You may do what the machine asks," she said. And we drew the blood. It confirmed Elena's suspicion. Cerebral malaria, stage 2. Treatment began immediately, and AO lived. That night, I stood outside the clinic, looking up at the stars, clearer here than anywhere I'd ever seen them. Elena joined me. "She almost died," she whispered. "And our perfect system said she was tier 3. I nodded, because it didn't know how to read her silence. Elena looked at me. "Maybe we've come as far as data can take us. Or maybe," I said, "this is where data has to learn humility." She was quiet for a while. Then she said something I wouldn't forget. "Next time we update the system, let's add a flag." "What kind?" "A human override. Something simple. A button that says, 'I know something you don't.'" And we did. Because sometimes it takes a machine to move fast, but it takes a human to know when to stop. There was dust on the envelope. Not metaphorical dust, actual dust. It arrived folded, with the ink smudged on the corner, as if it had been carried halfway across the planet in someone's pocket. And in a way it had. It came via diplomatic pouch, rerouted through Geneva, then handed to Jasmine by a visiting logistics coordinator. She placed it on my cot beside a packet of field reports. I almost didn't notice it. No name, no return address. But when I picked it up, I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was my mother's. I hadn't seen it in over 10 years. Not since the funeral. The letter was dated 3 months ago. She must have learned where I was through the media coverage. I held it for an hour before opening it. The words were simple, not poetic, not emotional in the way one might expect from an estranged parent. Just steady, honest. "Ryan, I saw your speech. Not the one at the startup conference years ago. The new one. The one where you said no. I never told you this, but your father used to say the same thing to the hospital board. If we lose our independence, we lose the patient. I guess you remember more of him than you think. I was wrong to cut things off the way I did. I blamed your ambition when really I didn't understand it. It looked like rejection, like you were choosing code over people. But now I see. You're trying to build something to protect them. Your sister asks about you often. She's in New Hampshire now. Married. A boy on the way. She says you still owe her a pancake breakfast. She's right. Asterisk, I don't expect a reply. But I wanted you to know I'm proud of you. And I miss you. Love, Mom asterisk. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Then I sat outside the tent, watching the horizon as the sun slipped into dust and smoke. Elena found me there an hour later. She didn't speak at first, just sat beside me, legs drawn in, hair tangled with the wind. "You okay?" she finally asked. "I don't know," I said. "It's strange. We've saved lives here. Real ones. And yet that letter, it hit harder than any medical loss." She nodded. "Because there's no algorithm for grief." I exhaled. I thought building something good would erase the mess I left behind. I thought if I made myself useful enough, maybe I'd stop feeling like a disappointment. She looked at me, her voice gentler than I deserved. "Ryan, usefulness isn't redemption. It's survival. Redemption comes when you stop trying to earn it." Silence again. A child's laughter echoed from somewhere behind the medical tents. A girl chasing a plastic bottle like it was a treasure. The sound pierced me more than anything clinical ever had. "I want to go home," I said quietly. She turned. "Now." "No," I said, "but soon. I think it's time I stop hiding behind Pulse Link." Time I go back and show up for people who never stopped waiting. Elena didn't try to stop me. She simply said, when you do, don't go back as the CEO. Go back as their son, their brother. I nodded. That night, I wrote a letter back. Not long, not formal. Just this. Mom, I got your note. Thank you for still believing I'm worth writing to. I'm not ready to come back just yet. But when I do, I won't be bringing headlines. Just pancakes. Tell Sarah to set the table. Ryan. I sealed it. Gave it to Jasmine the next morning with the words, make sure this finds New Hampshire. She smiled and asked no questions. Later that week, as I walked through the red soil of the clinic grounds, the tablet in my hand buzzed. Not with alerts, but with a single message from the Geneva team. Pulse Link, nominated Global Impact Tech Award 2025. I stared at it and smiled, not because of the recognition, but because for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I needed it. The airport in Boston felt smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was the low winter sky pressing against the terminal windows. Or maybe it was just me, returning not as the man who left, but as someone quieter, less armored. There were no cameras, no press, no investors waiting with questions. And that was exactly how I wanted it. I carried no suitcase, just a backpack. Inside it were a handful of clothes, my tablet, and a black envelope. One I hadn't opened since Geneva. It was the award invitation, the one I never responded to. Global Impact Tech Awards Ceremony. Washington, D.C. black tie required. It sat folded between a wrinkled shirt and the letter from my mother. I hadn't come home for the award. I'd come for her. I took a cab straight to the old street in Arlington, the one with maple trees that always looked like they were exhaling at the end of fall. The house hadn't changed much. The shutters were the same faded green. The porch swing still leaned slightly left, but something about it felt softer. I stood at the edge of the driveway for a long time before stepping up to the door. And then I knocked. It opened halfway. She looked older. Of course she did. More lines near the eyes. Hair streaked with gray. But her posture was still composed, still dignified in that unshakable New England way. Hi, Mom, I said. Her hand rose to her chest, as if to steady a breath. She didn't cry. She just stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. And for the first time in over a decade, I let myself be held. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and coffee. Some things, thankfully, never changed. She made tea while I sat at the kitchen table. The same one I used to do calculus homework on. The same one I once left mid-argument, declaring I'd prove her wrong someday. Funny thing is, I didn't remember what I'd been trying to prove anymore. She placed a mug in front of me. Chamomile. No sugar. Just how I used to like it. We sat in silence. I wasn't sure you'd come, she finally said. I wasn't sure either, I replied. She looked at me then, really looked. Are you okay? I thought about it. About the girl in Juba. About Elena's hand gripping mine during that long night by the bedside. About the award invitation. The speeches. The silence. The systems we built. The ones we couldn't. And I said, I think I'm finally starting to be. She nodded slowly. Then, with a little laugh, said, your sister burned the first batch. What batch? Pancakes, she said, eyes gleaming. She insisted she'd make them herself to honor the return of the prodigal brother. Her words. I smiled. The next morning, I knocked on Sarah's door in New Hampshire with a grocery bag and an apology. She opened it wearing a sweatshirt 3 sizes too big and holding a baby. Is that your famous pancake batter in there? She asked, eyeing the bag. Depends, I said. You still like blueberries? She stepped aside, let me in. No lectures. No dramatics. Just reconnection. One laugh, one awkward hug, one syrup-sticky plate at a time. We talked for hours. About her job. About the baby. About what it meant to grow up in the same house, but come out so differently. And then she said something that nearly undid me. You know, she said, we weren't mad because you left. We were mad because you left alone. Like none of us mattered in the version of success you were chasing. I swallowed hard. I didn't know how to bring anyone with me, I said. I was so busy trying to prove I could climb, I didn't notice who I was leaving behind. She looked at the baby sleeping in her arms. Sometimes it's not the climb that matters, she said softly. It's who waits at the top. That night, back at my mother's house, I sat on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders and opened the black envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. Dear Mr. Carter, we honor not just the technology you built, but the values you protected. This year's award is not for invention. It's for courage. Should you choose to attend, we will hold your seat with quiet pride. The Global Impact Committee. I stared at the card. Then I looked at the stars and smiled. I didn't need to be there. Not because I didn't care, but because, for once, the people who mattered most already knew who I was. No spotlight could replace that. And maybe the real award had never been in Washington, D.C. Maybe it had always been here, on a porch that still creaked when someone leaned on the railing, in a kitchen where the tea still cooled too fast, in the silence between mother and son, finally whole again. The days moved slower now. Ryan had been back in Arlington for almost a month. He had no title, no calendar, no startup dashboard blinking with investor notes. Instead, his mornings started with walks, just him, a notebook, and the sound of leaves crunching underfoot along the edge of Spy Pond. He didn't miss the adrenaline. He missed Elena sometimes, yes. Missed the sound of her voice cutting through chaos with clarity. Missed the weight they carried together. But not the pace. Not the constant pressure to perform or prove. He'd built the thing. Then he'd walked away. And now, he was just learning how to live again. One morning, sitting by the pond, Ryan was sketching something in his notebook. Not code, not systems, just thoughts, sentences, memories, a sort of blueprint for a life that didn't revolve around product launches or stage lights. That's when the call came. Unknown number. Geneva area code. He stared at the screen, thumb hovering. Then answered. Ryan's speaking. The voice on the other end wasn't Elena's, but it carried the same quiet urgency. Mr. Carter, said the woman, my name is Dr. Amina Ghazi. I'm calling from Medicines de l'Avenir. Elena told me to reach out. She said if anyone could help, it was you. Ryan sat up straighter. What's going on? There's a new viral outbreak, she said. It started 2 weeks ago in coastal Sierra Leone. Children, mostly. No clear pattern yet. High fevers, rapid dehydration, seizures in late stages. We've quarantined the villages, but we're losing time. Ryan's mind started racing. His old instincts kicked in without permission. What do you need? She hesitated. We've been running Pulse Link's rural variant. It's helping us triage faster, but now the data's inconsistent. The system isn't accounting for new symptoms, and the network isn't robust enough to upload raw logs back to Geneva. You need someone to bridge the system and the field, Ryan said quietly. Yes, she replied, and to adapt the algorithm fast. There was silence on the line. He looked out over the water, where a boy in a red jacket was tossing breadcrumbs to ducks. The wind moved through the trees like a whisper. He thought about saying no, but something deeper inside said, not yet. Not when people like Elena were still out there fighting. I'll be there in 72 hours, he said. The plane touched down in Freetown at 4 a.m. Humidity rushed into the cabin like breath from the earth itself. Ryan carried nothing but a duffel bag and a hardened laptop sealed against dust. By 9 a.m., he was at the edge of the quarantine zone. Elena was already there. She looked thinner, paler, but her eyes, those unwavering eyes, lit up when she saw him. You always show up when it matters least and mean the most, she said, pulling him into a brief, fierce hug. He grinned. Figured I'd do something irresponsible before I settled down. You say that like we ever settle, she said, then turned back toward the makeshift clinic. Inside, it was chaos. Children on cots, for drips hanging from wires, nurses moving with exhausted precision. A generator buzzed in the corner. One of the Pulse Link devices sat blinking with warning messages. It's not recognizing the pattern, she said. The virus mimics early-stage typhoid, but there's an accelerant. Something pushes it into neurological territory fast. Ryan didn't speak. He opened his laptop, synced the tablet, and started scanning logs. For the next 14 hours, he barely looked up. He didn't eat, didn't sleep. He adjusted the triage tree. Cross-referenced symptoms against Pulse Link's extended pathogen matrix. Rewrote prioritization logic to allow override triggers based on a set of emerging behaviors. By dusk, the system pinged. New pattern recognized. PulseLink now recommends immediate antimalarial plus neurologic consult. Flagged as high-risk outlier. Elena leaned over, reading the new output. Ryan, this will save lives. He didn't answer. He just leaned back, the kind of tired that doesn't come from sleep deprivation, but from finally returning to the part of yourself that knows what it's meant to do. Later that night, Elena found him on the clinic roof, sitting under the stars. You came back, she said softly. He nodded. Not for the fight, for the clarity. You always did work best when things broke. He turned to her. I think I know what's next, he said. She raised an eyebrow. Not a company. Not another launch. A fellowship. For engineers who want to build for the bottom billion. Who don't want exits. They want impact. I'll mentor. Guide. Let them get their hands dirty where it counts. She smiled. You're becoming a quiet man, Ryan Carter. He looked up at the night sky. No, he said. Just a louder kind of useful. 3 years later, the world had changed, but quietly. There were no more standing ovations. No magazine covers. Ryan Carter's name had gradually faded from the headlines and slid into footnotes. He liked it that way. He hadn't attended another awards ceremony, hadn't taken a single interview. The man who once stood on TED stages in fitted suits now spent most of his days in a modest, sun-drenched corner of Vermont. He ran the Foundation for Applied Silence, a fellowship for engineers and designers building for unseen places, refugee camps, forgotten clinics, post-conflict zones. People who didn't want funding rounds or personal brands, just results. They met twice a year in a cabin he'd helped restore with his own hands. No Wi-Fi, just chalkboards, maps, conversation. And every night ended the same way, with stories by the fire and a reminder scribbled in every fellow's notebook. If it doesn't make a life better, it doesn't need to be built. But even in quiet, life has a way of knocking on the door. One late autumn morning, Ryan received a letter, not digital, not formal, just hand-delivered in an envelope sealed with wax. The return address was Geneva. Inside was a short note from Medicines de l'Avenir. Ao is graduating next month. Top of her class in community medicine. She asked if you would attend. No pressure, but she still keeps that tablet you carried into the tent that day. Says it was the first time she saw what care could look like. Also, Elena will be there. Ryan held the letter in both hands. Ao. He hadn't heard her name spoken aloud in over a year, but it never left his memory. The little girl who once trembled in the heat of South Sudan was now becoming a healer herself. He stood by the window, watching the wind roll across the grass. 3 hummingbirds hovered by the feeder. The chimney puffed low smoke from the fellowship cabin, where 5 of his newest engineers were sketching ideas for disaster response water filtration. He could stay, keep building from here. Or he could go, not to lead, not to fix, just to witness. He packed that night. Geneva was colder than he remembered. The ceremony was held at a small medical college tucked near the old district, where the mountains sloped in the distance like folded hands. Nothing extravagant, just rows of chairs, proud parents, and hopeful eyes. Ao walked across the stage with quiet grace, her hair in a braid, her shoulders strong. When her name was called, she smiled not for the crowd, but for one person seated in the back corner. Ryan raised his hand in a soft wave. She nodded. Afterward, she found him beneath an elm tree outside the auditorium. I didn't know if you'd come, she said. I almost didn't, he admitted. But then I realized you're not the girl I helped. You're the doctor I came to learn from. Ao laughed, a low, kind sound. You know, she said, I still use the phrase Elena taught me. The one your system didn't have. He tilted his head. I know something you don't, she quoted. That override saved more people than the whole algorithm sometimes. They stood in silence. Then she glanced over his shoulder. She's behind you, Ao whispered. Ryan turned. Elena stood there, older, more worn by sun and time, but her eyes still cut clean through the noise of the world. She walked up slowly, stopping a few feet away. I heard you became a mountain man, she said. I heard you still never take breaks. She smiled. Some things don't change. But Ryan's voice was steadier than ever. Some do. She looked at him carefully, searching for something in his face, and found it. I thought you disappeared for good, she said. I almost did, he replied. But then I realized disappearing isn't the same as healing. One isolates, the other prepares. She took a step closer. Are you prepared now? He looked past her to Ao, who was greeting other graduates, then to the mountains, then, finally, to her. Yes, he said, for whatever comes next. They didn't rush it. They didn't make grand declarations or rewrite history. But that night, over a shared bottle of red wine and laughter neither had practiced in years, Ryan made one final decision. Not to return a pulse link, not to rebuild the past, but to keep showing up in places that mattered. For people who believed in quiet revolutions. And for one woman who never asked him to be more than he already was. Only truer, only present, only human. Years later, long after PulseLink had become an open-source backbone in clinics across 4 continents. Long after Ao had opened her first rural health hub in Uganda. Long after the last fellowship gathering beneath the Vermont sky. Ryan Carter lived quietly on the edge of a lake most people couldn't find on a map. He didn't wear watches anymore. He didn't attend summits or answer calls from media outlets wanting to revisit the legend. His home had no awards on the walls. No trophies, no framed headlines. Just shelves lined with books, handwritten notes from fellows, and a single photograph. Elena, Ao, and him, 3 generations of different kinds of builders standing barefoot on red soil in South Sudan, smiling like no one was watching. He spent his mornings walking the trail near the water, his afternoons tending to a small greenhouse behind the cabin, and his evenings writing letters, not emails, real letters, to the fellows who now mentored others, and to a handful of rural doctors whose names the world would never know, but who had changed more lives than any billionaire ever would. One morning, while sipping tea on his porch, Ryan opened a journal and wrote a single line on the first page. The greatest systems are invisible, like love, dignity, and the kind of care that doesn't need recognition. He closed the journal, listened to the wind, and smiled, because in a world obsessed with noise, he had chosen silence. And in that silence, he had helped build something that outlived applause.